A woman was thrown into a dry well. The well was filled with dry bones, like a hellish scene. Then, a terrifying monster crawled out. Carter crouched by the well, watching the woman being swallowed by the monster. Why was he offering human flesh to the monster? What secrets were hidden within this? The story goes back a few days. At this time, it is in 1993. The protagonist Lisa was on a long-distance bus, heading to Sambuchi, Italy. Along the way, 3 people boarded the bus. Sitting near Lisa, the girl was very friendly, and she took the initiative to talk to Lisa. After chatting, they learned that they were all headed to Sambuchi. The girl's name was Tracy. The black girl was named Madison. Both of them were biologists, and they had come to observe the local wildlife. They had even hired an Italian guide. His name is Tony. Lisa introduced herself as well, saying she was a painting restorer. She was going to her employer's home to restore an oil painting. At this time, the 4 were chatting merrily, unaware that this was a journey of death. Until midnight, the bus arrived in Sambuchi. The place was shrouded in fog, creating a strange atmosphere. It was clearly not a good place, yet they did not notice anything unusual. Later, the 4 of them parted ways. At a fork in the road, Lisa waited under the bus stop sign until dawn. A man came over to remind her that the bus on this route was temporarily out of service. After learning that the girl was heading to the Meliso mansion, he immediately offered to take Lisa there. On the way, Marcus introduced her to the mansion, which had a long history. It was once the residence of a great noble family from Lazio. He took Lisa to the entrance of the mansion, and mentioned that the owner, Duchess Marcy, had lost her husband long ago, but she was very kind. Marcus was the owner of the bar across from the mansion. They might see each other often in the future. Once they entered the house, Mrs. Marcy warmly welcomed Lisa, and took her to the painting that needed restoration. That day, the fireplace suddenly caught fire. Fortunately, everyone acted quickly to save it, preventing the painting from being destroyed. But unfortunately, it ended up in its current condition. After Lisa understood the situation, she informed the lady that the restoration time would take about a month. However, Marcy insisted that it must be finished in 2 weeks, because the painting was to participate in an exclusive auction. After hearing this, Lisa planned to start immediately, and requested to sleep in this room. Mrs. Marcy agreed. Lisa took out a set of restoration tools, and began to wipe away the soot. Suddenly, Lisa seemed to hear a singing voice. She followed the source of the sound, and found a long-haired girl. But when the girl saw Lisa, she immediately turned and ran away. At night, Tony clipped the receiver to a branch, and returned to the campsite to listen for sounds. Suddenly, a strong electrical sound came through the headphones. Tony decided to go back to check.
Che succede?
After Madison heard the noise, she noticed that Tony was not in the tent, and grabbed a flashlight to look for him. Unexpectedly, she found on the ground Tony's bloodied hat. She hurried back to the campsite to inform Tracy, but in the next moment, she was grabbed by the neck and dragged away. Tracy screamed in fear, wanting to go out to find Madison, but was struck on the head with a stick. When the others came to, they realized they were in a prison. The ground and the beds were covered in rats. They were all greatly frightened. On the other side, Mrs. Marcy came to check on the progress, and was very pleased. Lisa's work was outstanding, as she wiped away the darkened areas, without damaging the painting with solvents. Mrs. Marcy felt relieved. She asked Lisa if she would like to join her for dinner, and to introduce her daughter Julia. Lisa replied that she had seen her during the day. The girl was a bit shy, and had run away as soon as she saw her. At dinner time, Lisa took the initiative to talk to the girl, but Julia unexpectedly put down her utensils, and left the table altogether, without saying a word. Mrs. Marcy quickly explained that her daughter suffered from severe personality disorders, and thus could not complete her studies, so she had to stay at home.
Posso chiederlo, di che cosa soffre?
Non va d'accordo con nessuno della sua età.
Mrs. Marcy also said that her daughter couldn't accept the reality after turning 13. When Lisa heard this, isn't that just the rebellious phase? She immediately understood the lady.
Ci sono persone che desiderano crescere e persone che desiderano fermare il tempo.
Seeing that it was getting late, Lisa bid farewell to the Duchess. She was preparing to go to bed, not noticing the lady's somber expression. Meanwhile, Carter arrived at the prison. He looked rather dim-witted, as if he had just escaped from a mental hospital. Carter first lowered a metal bucket into the dry well, and then pulled it back up. he set his sights on the guide Tony. Tony still wanted to resist, but Carter struck him with a single blow, rendering Tony unable to move. Then a flurry of slaps landed on his face, and he was pinned down and pummeled on the bed, until Tony lost all ability to resist. Yet he struggled to crawl out of the cell door. He was stabbed by a knife, and the others were frozen in fear. Then, Carter threw Tony into the dry well, and sounds of flesh being gnawed came from below. Carter then smeared the blood on his lips. Could this have some significance? The next day, early in the morning, Lisa began a new day of restoration work, but when the darkened marks were wiped away, the medieval painting revealed the head of a monster. Even more bizarre was that Lisa felt her heart rate rising, and her hands began to tremble. She took out a knife, wanting to scrape further to see. Lisa quickly removed her rubber gloves, but due to her excessive force, she splattered blood on the demon's face. Lisa cried out in pain. At night, despite the pain from her wounds, she persisted with her work to finish the restoration on time. Suddenly, with a clap of thunder, the lights in the room went out completely. Lisa threw away her restoration tools. At this moment, a man entered the room. Lisa was about to ask him to leave, but then she realized that this was none other than her father. Recent grievances surged within her, and Lisa wanted to complain to him, but her father pulled out a knife and cut his throat in front of her. Lisa was so frightened that she fell to the ground. In the next moment, everything before her vanished again. Could it be that she was under so much stress that she was hallucinating? On the other side, Madison noticed that a man was doing something secretly. When she asked, she learned that there was a drain cover in the cell. If it could be pried open, he could crawl out to seek help. Unfortunately, he didn't have any tools handy. Upon hearing this, Madison immediately threw him a knife, but the throw was too short, and the man stretched out his arm, but still couldn't reach it. Fortunately, there were shoes nearby. After some effort, he finally got hold of the knife. The two exchanged hopeful smiles. They encouraged each other, saying they would definitely escape. Meanwhile, Lisa had already fallen into a deep sleep. Suddenly, someone burst into the room. The person approached the bedside and lay down beside Lisa. Then, a hand that was clearly not human began to touch Lisa's body. Could this be a perverted creature? But in the next moment, it grasped Lisa's fragile neck. Lisa struggled desperately. Suddenly, she jolted awake from her dream. Her body ached all over. She had fallen asleep on a stool all night, and the restoration of the painting had progressed further. A little demon had appeared in the painting, just like the one in Lisa's dream. She stared at the demon, and seemed to hear the cries of children in her ears. Her mind was captivated by the painting, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. After a long time, Lisa finally snapped back to reality. She noticed trash on the floor. The first thing the girl said to Lisa was to tell her to run quickly, while there was still a chance, because the painting was cursed. The witch who cursed it, Dorca, had been living in this house all along. If Lisa gave life to the oil painting, she would be tormented by the demon. After Julia finished speaking, she left without another word. At night, Lisa went to Marcus's bar to tell him about her recent experiences. The monster in her nightmares felt too vivid, almost as if it were real, but Marcus thought that Lisa was under too much psychological pressure. She was afraid that, if she didn't restore it properly, it would ruin her father's reputation. That's why she was having nightmares. Lisa seemed to be convinced, because her father was indeed a very strict person. On the other side, Carter returned to the cell with the metal bucket again. He first placed the bucket at the bottom of the well. He saw a pale arm reaching out, which cut its wrist, releasing blood. Then, Carter pulled the metal bucket back to the surface, and began preparing today's meal. It was meant for the older brother, who wanted to escape. Once he was killed, the others would have no hope left. Madison chose to sacrifice herself. She started to incessantly insult the creepy man, drawing him closer to her. Tracy wanted to stop the tragedy from happening, but was utterly powerless to do so. She could only watch. Carter opened the cell door. The man dragged her friend's feet and pulled her out of the cell. Madison grabbed onto the bars, but was brutally cut down. After enduring torment, Carter threw Madison into the dry well, where it was filled with human bones. Carter had been feeding the monster for a long time. Before long, the monster crawled onto Madison and began to savor today's meal. Meanwhile, Carter crouched by the well to watch. The next morning, Julia looked down at a young couple kissing below, and unexpectedly started to cry. At this moment, Lisa took the initiative to approach the girl, hoping to talk about the painting. Julia tried to wipe away the tears on her face, but Lisa noticed something unusual about the girl. She went to the window and looked down. There is a passionate couple downstairs. She thought that the rebellious girl had fallen for someone, so she smiled and said, "One day, the girl will find her true love." But Julia was still sad. She said that the boy didn't want to see her now. Lisa then asked Julia, what exactly happened? Julia said she would be forever alone. It was all her mother's fault. She was too selfish, and had completely ruined my life for her own sake. At this moment, Mrs. Marcy burst into the room to stop her daughter from continuing. Seeing the tension between the mother and daughter, Lisa was about to ease the atmosphere, but she was called away by Mrs. Marcy. As soon as she stepped outside, Mrs. Marcy explained that her daughter blamed her for stopping her from dating. But the problem was, the people Julia fell in love with were much older than she was. Lisa expressed that she could understand. Then she inquired about the oil painting. Julia said, "The painting is cursed." Before she could finish, Mrs. Marcy immediately denied it, telling Lisa not to believe her, because Julia loved to tell scary stories to frighten others. Then, Mrs. Marcy threatened Lisa with a penalty, saying she needed to focus on restoring the painting. That night, it began to rain lightly outside. Lisa fell asleep to the sound of the rain. At this moment, someone pushed a wheelchair into the room. Lisa woke up and was shocked to see Teresa pushing Tony's corpse. The girl was crying incessantly, pleading with Lisa to save them. Seeing Tony's dismembered body, Lisa screamed as she broke free from the nightmare. Then she ran to Marcus. Now, Lisa was in a dilemma. If she went back, she'd have to pay a huge penalty, but if she stayed, she would be scared out of her wits. Marcus hurried to comfort Lisa, saying it was just a nightmare. There are no demons in the world. The penalty is what matters more. He urged Lisa to stay and continue restoring the painting. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Lisa finally returned to her room in the castle. She had just taken a sedative when she heard a girl's crying behind the shower curtain. She walked over and pulled back the curtain, only to find Madison lying in a pool of blood, with her left arm missing. Lisa was terrified and almost lost her mind. She hurriedly ran outside. She happened to run into Mrs. Marcy, who was coming to check on things. At this moment, there was no body in the bathtub, only clean water overflowing. Lisa couldn't explain what had happened, but the series of shocks made her not want to stay in the castle. Mrs. Marcy immediately dismissed this. She said that only when the painting was fully restored, Lisa could leave. On the other side, with the older brother's efforts, they finally managed to pry open the drain cover. He dove in headfirst, but unexpectedly, he collided with the monster's claw, which ripped off the man's face, and the older brother got stuck in the opening, unable to pull back out. He was left to become the monster's late-night snack, the only one left. Tracy, she covered her ears, but the screams of humans continued to pierce her ears. On the last day of the deadline, only the lower right corner of the painting remained to be restored. Meanwhile, Mrs. Marcy was stroking her face. Then, she drank a cup of an unknown liquid. The next second, a monster suddenly appeared in the mirror. A determined look flashed in Mrs. Marcy's eyes. Lisa was completely unaware of this. She was still focused on restoring the painting. At this moment, Julia came over, urging Lisa to stop immediately. If she continued to restore it, she would end up like the others. Seeing that Lisa didn't believe her, she began to tell the story of the painting. In 1493, they used the boy Billy as bait to capture the monster Gorin. At that time, Mrs. Marcy recited a spell and used the painting as a medium to control the monster Gorin. She gained eternal youth from Gorin's blood. Julia also told Lisa that the moon would turn red again tonight. If the red moon shines on a complete oil painting before midnight, the curse will continue for another 500 years. To prove she wasn't lying, Julia mentioned that the 3 latest victims, Lisa recognized the descriptions as they matched Tony and his group. She urged the girl to take her to find those 3. The 2 entered a narrow passage, walking down the path. After opening the door, Carter appeared before them. The cage that imprisons everyone is under the castle. Suddenly, a voice echoed from afar. As Mrs. Marcy searched for Julia, the girl couldn't stay long, for fear of raising her mother's suspicions. But Lisa couldn't just ignore it. Though she felt afraid, she picked up a hammer and walked down. She saw Carter holding a metal bucket. She opened the hidden door and entered the cell. Then, following his method to open the secret door. She passed through the narrow path, but Lisa was very cautious. She didn't immediately follow, just in time to avoid Carter's line of sight. After Carter entered the door, Lisa was about to follow him, but accidentally knocked over a metal rod. The noise made Carter turn around. Lisa quickly hid behind some clutter. Fortunately, Carter wasn't very bright, and didn't notice where Lisa was hiding. The stench of decay masked Lisa's scent. After searching without success, he re-entered the cage. Today's meal was Tracy. Carter opened the cell door, and the fool actually got lustful. Stroking Tracy's body, the girl seized the moment, and kicked him where it hurt, and then escaped from the cell. At this moment, Lisa emerged from the pile of clutter. There were so many clothes on the ground, the number of victims was terrifying. Lisa calmed herself. She moved towards the cell. Tracy slipped, and hit her head on the stairs. When she recovered, Carter appeared in front of her. Lisa heard the girl's screams. She quickened her pace. Carter was ready to throw the girl down. Lisa swung the hammer, and struck him on the head. Meanwhile, Tracy clung to the edge of the well. Lisa dodged the attack, and then knocked Carter down with a blow. Then, she hurried to pull Tracy up, and escaped from the cell with her. But today, Tracy had bad luck, and accidentally stepped on a nail. Lisa helped pull it out, but now was not the time to cry out in pain. Lisa supported the girl as they ran away. On the other side, Carter had already regained consciousness. Noticing something was off, he went to the older brother's cell and discovered that Goran had escaped through the drain. At this moment, Carter heard a noise, and immediately turned around with his knife raised, but upon seeing who it was, he dropped his weapon, kneeling on the ground in a sacrificial posture. He congratulated Carter for becoming today's best snack. On the other side, Lisa pulled Tracy through the hidden door. Just as they were about to escape the castle, Marcus appeared outside the door. Lisa was about to call for help, when an unexpected event occurred. Lisa couldn't believe what was happening in front of her. Marcus aimed his weapon at Lisa again, forcing her to return to the castle. When Lisa returned to her room, the people who had participated in capturing Goran were gathered here, holding candles. Mrs. Marcy urged Lisa to quickly restore everything to light. With only 10 minutes left until midnight, Lisa had no choice but to continue restoring the painting. The revealed face was indeed Mrs. Marcy, and the next face was Marcus. It seemed that Marcus and Lisa's first meeting was also a premeditated conspiracy. Due to the curse, they could not touch the painting, which is why they sought an outsider to restore it. No wonder Marcus persuaded Lisa to restore the painting. Just as the spellbook was about to be wiped clean, Julia walked into the room holding a candle. Taking advantage of their unpreparedness, she immediately sprayed gasoline on the lower right corner of the painting. With the candle in hand, she pretended to set the painting on fire. Having lived as a child for centuries, she was fed up with this life long ago. In a moment of desperation, Mrs. Marcy ordered her daughter to be killed. Lisa poured gasoline on Marcus's face. At this moment, the clock struck midnight. The red moon was still shrouded in smoke. The painting was not fully cleaned yet. Mrs. Marcy was furious, snatching up the crossbow, and shot it into Lisa's abdomen. Julia rushed to protect her. Just as they were about to fight desperately, the red moon fully appeared. The group was instantly struck by the backlash of the curse, screaming as they fell to the ground. Mrs. Marcy transformed into a white-haired old woman, and then they all turned into mummified corpses. Suddenly, Julia also felt unwell. She realized something. After bidding farewell to Lisa, she let her hair down and approached the mirror. Smiling, she looked at herself in the mirror. She had finally transformed into an adult. Lisa was genuinely happy for her. But when Julia turned around, time had flown by. In the end, she disintegrated into fine dust, leaving this painful world behind. Lisa stood up in pain, preparing to go out and seek help. She encountered Goran running out. Lisa bolted the door, but it couldn't hold back the monster. Then she remembered something, and immediately returned to the painting. She wiped away the part of the spell in the painting. At this moment, Goran crashed through the door and came in. Lisa read the text aloud, reciting the spell to control Goran. The poor thing would have to work for another 500 years. Time flew by rapidly, arriving at the year 2023. 30 years later, the painting still sat on the mantelpiece, but the castle's owner had become a dark version of Lisa. She had expanded her business, supplying Goran's blood to political figures. The basement had also been transformed into a laboratory. Goran was locked onto a bed, so that blood could be extracted at any time, and thus, the story came to an end. In the end, the dragon slayer became the dragon, but it is unknown what Lisa would use to feed the monster. In the early part of the film, the atmosphere was thick with horror and suspense, interspersed with many bloody scenes, showing the monster's cruel bloodlust in a vivid manner. But as the film progressed, the true horror was not the demons and monsters, but rather those insatiable humans. If you like my channel, please give me a subscription.